The dust came first, curling along the earth like it had memory, like it was tracing the same sorrowful path it always had when something shameful rolled into town. They heard the wagon before they saw it. One wheel thudded like a bad heart, pulling awkward against the road's ruts. A mule plodded slow at its front, ribs showing beneath sunburned hide, and a man with a crooked hat and tobacco-stained fingers held the reins like he was dragging guilt behind him. He barely looked up as the wagon creaked into the heart of the town. She was sitting in the back, still as a church pew. Her hands folded over the swell of her stomach, not in fear, not anymore, but in something quieter, harder. A kind of surrender. 25 years old and already hollowed out like dry timber. She wore a brown calico dress, once pale and probably pretty, now stained with the kind of dirt that didn't wash out. The belly beneath it rose firm and full. Nearing her time, anyone could see that. But her eyes didn't look toward the crowd gathering, only at the sky, as if it might swallow her whole if she stared long enough. No one spoke, at first. Townsfolk stood on porches and behind windows. A mother clutched her son's hand. An old man spat into the dust. A teenage boy laughed once before his father cuffed the back of his head. Everyone knew why she was here. The traitor, some called him Tib, some didn't call him anything, jumped down and held out a hand toward her. She didn't take it, only stood on her own, one hand steadying her back. "Debt's a debt," he muttered to no one, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "And she's what's left of it." Whispers flitted through the air like flies. Her husband, they said, had gone to gamble in San Angelo, left her behind in the care of his father, then vanished. The old man couldn't pay what he owed. So here she was. Pregnant and unwanted. The last chip on the table. She stepped down onto the dirt road with bare feet, slow but sure. Not a stumble in her. Even when the mule sneezed and the wagon groaned behind her, she didn't flinch. The baby kicked, maybe. Her hand moved to soothe it. And still, her eyes never left the sky. "Who'll take her?" Tib called, voice flat as prairie wind. Strong. Quiet. Due any day. No answer. A cough. A shuffling boot. But not a single voice. Then, from the back of the crowd, someone moved. He wasn't tall like legend said cowboys ought to be. He had shoulders like a beam that had held up too many winters, and a face weathered like dry leather. His beard was kept but not neat. His hat had been a better color once. And his eyes were the only part of him untouched by age or grief. They were calm. Deep. Not curious. Just watching. He stepped forward slow. Said nothing. Tib squinted. "You buying?" Still nothing. Then the man turned, walked to the hitching post, and untied his horse. Reached into the saddlebag and pulled free a Winchester rifle, aged but clean, followed by a small pouch that clinked softly. He laid both at Tib's feet. Tib whistled low, nodded. "Yours now." She didn't look at the man. Not right away. Only when he stepped close, when the sun cast both their shadows into the dust and they nearly touched, did she raise her eyes. He tipped his hat, the smallest gesture of respect. Not ownership. Just recognition. Then, without a word, he turned and walked. And she followed. The cabin stood a mile outside town, near a creek that still ran in dry season and a cottonwood tree whose bark peeled like old paper. It wasn't much, one room, one bed, a stove, and a chair that creaked when sat in. But the floor was swept, and the hearth still warm from the morning fire. He pointed to the corner where a folded quilt and spare pillow lay on a clean board floor. She sat slowly, knees to her chest, belly rising like a hill between them. He poured water into a basin, placed it near her, then stepped outside. For a long time, nothing moved but the shadows. That night, he stayed in the chair. She lay on the floor, watching the flicker of the flames like they were telling stories she almost remembered. Outside, coyotes sang far off, and the wind rustled the leaves above the roof. She didn't cry. Not when the baby kicked hard. Not when her back ached so bad it forced a gasp. Not even when she whispered something into the quiet, not meant for anyone but herself. But he heard. "I won't let them take them from me. Not these two." He looked up, not moving. Not interrupting. Only nodding, once. The next day came pale and cold. Mist hovered low over the creek. She woke before dawn, gathered kindling, started the fire. He rose to find coffee already brewing. No words were exchanged. But something softened in the air between them. He saw her lift a heavy pot with one hand while bracing her belly with the other. He moved to help, then stopped, watching her finish the task without complaint. She saw him check the fence line later, talking low to his horse as he walked. He rubbed its ears, told it stories. They were both used to silence. But theirs was not cruel. It was careful. The town didn't say much when she didn't return. Tib had taken his payment and gone. The sheriff knew better than to stir trouble where none wanted stirring. Some whispered that the cowboy had bought her to get revenge on a man who once wronged him. Others said he'd lost a child once, and this was God's strange way of setting things right. But truth is, no one knew what passed between them. Only that she didn't come back. And that he started buying more beans. That afternoon, as she sat shelling peas on the porch, a little girl wandered up the path. Freckled, nose running, dragging a doll missing one arm. She stared at the belly, then at the woman's face. "Does it hurt?" she asked. The woman blinked, then shook her head. "Sometimes." The cowboy came out just then. The little girl ran off without another word. He looked at the woman. She gave the faintest smile. "I didn't lie," she said. He returned it, barely. "Some truths ain't heavy till you carry them." They stood there, side by side, watching the dust trail vanish. That evening, he set a book on the table. It was worn, the leather cracked, pages yellowing. A Bible, but not for preaching. Just for remembering. She didn't open it. Not yet. But her hand rested on it a moment longer than it needed to. And when she laid back down that night, belly shifting as she turned, she didn't face the wall anymore. She faced the fire. Somewhere in the dark, as sleep crept in and the night softened its edges, she whispered again. "You didn't ask my name." He opened his eyes. "You didn't offer it." She paused. Then, "Maybe I will." He didn't reply. But a quiet passed between them like the breath of a horse in cold air. And it stayed warm the whole night through. The spring crept in slow that year, like it wasn't sure it belonged. Cold clung longer than usual. The creek stayed mostly quiet, a silver whisper winding past the cottonwood. The girl spent her mornings watching its flow from the porch, hands curled around a cup of broth, eyes never quite resting. He gave her space. Not because he was indifferent, but because he understood the shape of grief, how it swells in silence and folds into the corners of rooms when no one's looking. She worked more than he liked. He'd come back from chopping wood to find her sweeping, hauling buckets, trying to hang wet linen despite the weight of her belly. She moved like someone who didn't know how to rest. Someone who'd paid too dearly for stillness in the past. He never scolded. Just took the pail from her hand and poured it himself. She never thanked him out loud, but something in her shoulders softened, like she didn't have to explain herself. In those first days, they spoke mostly in gestures. He'd fix the door when it stuck. She'd mend the hem of his shirt when it tore. He started carving spoons in the evenings, shaping them from leftover pine, letting the soft rhythm of whittling fill the quiet between them. She watched once, curious. "You always make things you don't need?" He didn't look up. "Sometimes your hands gotta keep busy when your heart don't know what to do." She didn't respond, but the next morning, he found the spoon washed and set neatly beside the fire. The midwife arrived a few days later. A stout woman with a firm voice and hands that had brought more than 60 children into the world. She smelled of lavender and dried tobacco. Took one look at the girl, nodded once, and said, "Soon." The girl tensed, subtly, as if the word itself stole her breath. "She'll be safe," the cowboy said quietly. The midwife glanced at him, not unkindly. "She better be." The girl sat still as she was examined. Only flinched once when the midwife pressed gently against her lower belly. "How long?" 3, maybe 4 days, the woman said, rinsing her hands. "Could be sooner, if the second one's impatient." "Second?" The midwife looked up. "You didn't know?" The girl shook her head. "You're carrying twins. Can't you feel it?" She blinked, lips parting just slightly, then closed again. Her hand went to her stomach, not shocked, but stunned in a different way. Like she was waiting for someone to correct it. The cowboy turned away. Gave her that moment without witness. After the midwife left, the girl stood near the hearth, one hand braced on the edge of the mantel. He watched her from the door. "Two," she whispered, not looking at him. He didn't move closer. "That a good thing or a hard thing?" She smiled faintly. "Not joy, not pain. Just something real." "Both." That night, a storm swept in. Not wild, but steady, the kind that makes windows rattle and animals huddle close. She stepped outside to tie down the wash line, and he found her halfway to the barn, soaked to the elbows. "What are you doing?" Her voice came over the rain like mist. "I left a blanket in the stall. The old gray likes to chew it. Figured I'd save the poor thing's teeth." He stared a moment, then pulled his coat from his shoulders, wrapping it around her without asking. "Could have waited." "I don't know how to," she said simply. They stood under the lean-to, rain drumming overhead, the air between them thick with questions neither had the courage to voice. She turned to him after a while, her breath uneven. "Were you ever afraid of being alone?" He nodded slowly. "Still am." "Then why live out here?" He considered. "Because I'm not afraid of quiet. Just afraid no one will ever come into it again." Her eyes searched his, and something passed between them, not romance, not yet. Just recognition. The next morning, he found her sitting in his chair, fingers tracing the fraying seam in the armrest. The fire had burned low. He'd left it high the night before. She didn't move when he stepped in. "You're always up first," he said. She shrugged. "The babies don't sleep long. Figured I'd keep the fire company." "You cold?" "No," she said softly. "Just wanted to sit where it was warm." He nodded and started the coffee. "Firewood's nearly out," he said. "I'll ride to the old mill, pick up more." "I'll come." "You shouldn't. I need air. I'm not made of glass." He didn't argue, but he didn't say yes either. Just left it there, like the kind of silence that lets the answer grow on its own. On the trail, they rode slow. Her on the mule, him beside her on foot, holding the reins gently as the wind pulled at their clothes. The landscape rolled out around them in soft golds and grays. No grand mountains, no wild herds, just fences, far-off trees, and the wide, endless sky. "This land always feel lonely to you?" she asked. He tilted his head. "Sometimes. But it listens better than people do." She smiled at that. "Guess that's true. It never interrupts." They reached the mill, gathered what they needed, and started back before noon. On the way home, the mule stumbled slightly. The girl gasped and reached for the saddle horn. The cowboy caught her arm before she slipped. She steadied. Looked down at him. "You always this quiet?" He gave a half-smile. "No. I just wait for people to stop pretending before I speak." She nodded, understanding more than she said. That evening, as the sun dropped low and the sky turned soft amber, she stood by the creek again. He joined her, holding out a tin of tea. "You said your wife died," she murmured. "I did." "How long ago?" 5 years this autumn." "Was she kind?" "She was tired," he said after a pause. "Tired from trying to make something live that didn't want to." The girl didn't pry. Only listened. That was all he needed. Later, she asked, what would she think of me? He took his time answering. "She'd want you to rest. And she'd tell me to stop trying to carry guilt that isn't mine." The girl blinked, a flicker of something tender in her expression. Then she reached for the tea. "Still hot," she said, surprised. He looked at the cup. "Sometimes the fire knows what's needed before we do." That night, she didn't sleep on the floor. He hadn't asked her to move, hadn't offered the bed. But when he returned from brushing down the mule, she was already curled on top of the quilt, her back to the door, the babies heavy in her breath. He took the chair, as always. And he smiled, faintly, at the sight of her. Because something had changed. Not in her, not yet. But in the air. In the way she didn't brace herself anymore when he stepped near. In the way her voice softened around him. In the way she looked at the cabin not like a cage, but like a place that might someday hold her name again. He watched the fire, hands folded, heart full of things he still didn't know how to say. And from across the room, the sound of her breathing, slow, steady, filled that silence better than any word ever could. The wind shifted the night before it began. Not a loud wind. Not the kind that tears shingles off roofs or drives cattle to madness. It was softer, stranger. Like it had come whispering through the cottonwoods just to tell the old bones of the house that something was about to change. She felt it first. A low ache blooming in her back as she turned in bed, the kind that didn't ask permission. She sat up slowly, the firelight casting her in flickering gold, hands pressed to her belly as the ache became a tightening, a silent warning deep inside. She didn't cry out. She never had. He was still in the chair, as always, dozing with his arms folded, head bowed like prayer. The fire burned low, but steady, the way he always kept it, like a promise to the dark. She breathed through it. Counted, waited. Another tightening. Then another. She wrapped her shawl tighter and stood, bare feet soundless on the worn floorboards. By the time he opened his eyes, she was already kneeling by the hearth, hands pressed to the small of her back, eyes focused on a spot just past the flame. "It's time," she said quietly. He was on his feet in a second. No panic. Just motion. He crossed the room, laid a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You sure?" She nodded. Eyes sharp. Lips pale. "The midwife?" "I'll ride," he said, already grabbing his coat. "No. Don't go." He paused. She looked up at him, and this time the fear wasn't buried. It was shining, bare and trembling, right there in her eyes. "They won't make it in time. I know it. I need you here." He didn't hesitate. "Then I stay." And he did. He pulled the spare linens from the trunk, boiled water, gathered every clean cloth they had. She moved between the bed and the chair, pacing when she could, gripping the edge of the table when she couldn't. The contractions came hard now, fast as footsteps in a chase, and each one folded her in half with its fury. Still, she made no sound but breath. Harsh, raw, determined breath. When her knees buckled, he caught her. Carried her to the bed without asking. Set her down gentle as snow. She clutched his shirt, sweat beading at her temples. "It's too early," she gasped. "They're not ready." "They're ready," he whispered. "Because you are." She laughed, then cried, just once, and held on tighter. Hours passed. The fire burned low, then high again. He kept feeding it, never letting the light slip. She groaned through the worst of it, her body racked with effort, strength and pain interwoven like a braid. He wiped her brow, pressed cool cloths to her neck, spoke soft encouragements that barely rose above breath. "You're doing it. You're right here. I see you. I see you." And she believed him. The first child came before dawn, slippery and red-faced, lungs full of fury. He caught it with hands steadier than his heartbeat, wrapped it quickly, held it close. A boy. Breathing strong. He turned to her, to tell her, but her face twisted with another cry, sharp and sudden. The second had come fast behind. "No pause," she gasped. "He's coming, now." He didn't flinch. Just steadied her, helped her bear down, helped her break open all over again. This one was smaller. Paler. Silent at first. His hands trembled now as he rubbed the tiny chest, coaxing life, calling it forward. "Come on, little one," he whispered. "Don't you dare stay quiet." And then. A cry. Thin, high, real. A girl. He sank to his knees, both newborns now swaddled in flannel and warmth, and for the first time in years, his eyes filled with tears he did not hide. She had gone quiet behind him. He turned fast, heart twisting. But she was breathing. Barely. A hand weakly outstretched. He brought the babies to her, one under each arm, lowered them to her sides. "They're here," he said softly. "They're safe." She opened her eyes, took them in. Her lips moved. "What's that?" He leaned in. "They're beautiful." He nodded. "They are." A pause. Then, faintly. "Don't let anyone take them." His hand closed around hers. "They're yours. They'll never belong to anyone else." The wind had died down outside. Only the crackle of fire and the first faint bird call of morning filled the room. She fell asleep like that, babies tucked in beside her, hand still caught in his. He stayed up. Watching. Guarding. He watched her chest rise and fall, slow and peaceful now. Watched the two tiny lives she'd carried move, shift, settle. One made a noise, half sigh, half dream. The other curled against her side, fist tucked under chin. He looked down at them, long and quiet. It struck him then, not how small they were, but how immense the moment felt. Like holding something sacred. Like holding sunrise itself. He had never thought of himself as a father. Had never tried. Had buried that dream alongside a small grave under the cottonwood, seasons ago. But this? This was different. This had come not from blood, but from choice. From staying when he could have walked away. From carrying her pain like it was something he'd known all his life. He looked over at her again. She was sleeping. Deep, clean sleep. Like the kind you get only after surviving something impossible. He leaned back in the chair. The fire had burned all night. He hadn't even noticed. He closed his eyes, just for a second. Outside, the first light of day touched the earth. And inside the cabin, a new kind of quiet settled. Not the silence of sorrow. Not the hush of waiting. But something else. Something full. And alive. The sun filtered through the cottonwood like honey, warm and forgiving. Days had passed since the birth, though none of them counted them. Time moved differently now, measured in feeding cries and soft breathing, in tiny fists curling around shirt fabric, in the whisper of bare feet pacing the floorboards just before dawn. She moved slowly but steadier with each passing day. Her skin, once tight with pain and weariness, had color again. The hollow beneath her cheekbones had begun to fade, as if the weight she'd carried all those months had lifted not just from her body, but from her soul. The babies, one boy, one girl, thrived in their own small ways. The boy loud, insistent, determined. The girl quieter, more patient, always watching. She said once, without thinking, that they reminded her of fire and still water. The cowboy had built a crib with his hands. Took old pine from the back shed, sanded each board until it was soft as worn paper, and painted it the pale blue of spring skies. He didn't say much when he brought it in, only set it near the window and waited for her to look up. She had. Then she nodded. And that was enough. Their rhythm settled into something unspoken. She nursed while he chopped wood. He changed cloths and rocked the girl while she rested. They moved like a pair who'd spent years together, though neither dared call it love, not yet. That word had teeth. But whatever it was between them, it was growing like the wild vines behind the shed, quiet, persistent, sure. Word spread, as word always does in towns too small to forget. A woman, sold for debt, now living with the cowboy out by the creek. Twins born in the dead of night. Some spoke with pity. Some with disgust. A few with admiration. The sheriff came by once, said nothing at all, only tipped his hat and left a small basket of apples on the porch. The innkeeper's daughter stopped by with cloth scraps and asked shyly if she could hold one of the babies. She sat for an hour on the steps, whispering songs the way her mother once had. When she left, she promised to come back with more cloth, more thread. The porch became a place of pause. He built her a rocking chair there, too, rough wood smoothed with care. She sat in it every evening, a baby in each arm, the light gold and endless across the prairie. He'd sit beside her, sometimes just whittling, sometimes saying nothing at all. And then, one day, a shadow came walking up the path. He saw the shape before the face. Broad hat. Slouched gait. A man who wore arrogance like perfume, heavy and sour. Her hand tightened around the baby before the man even spoke. "I came for what's mine." The cowboy didn't stand. Not right away. The man stepped closer. "Don't act like you don't know. That's my wife. Those are my children. I have a right." The cowboy rose then. Slow. Deliberate. Like a tree stretching from sleep. "She was your debt. That's how you saw her. You left her for dead. I didn't ask for twins. I just want my name back." She stood now too, the rocking chair still creaking behind her. The boy stirred in her arms, let out a small yawn, then went quiet again. "You gave up your name the moment you sold me," she said calmly. He scoffed. "You think you're safe here with him? He's nothing." The cowboy didn't move. He didn't reach for the rifle by the door. He didn't raise his voice. He just stepped once between the man and the porch. "She doesn't need protection," he said. "But if she asks me to stand here, I will." A pause. The air thick with waiting. She said nothing. But her hand reached out and touched the cowboy's arm. That was answer enough. The man shifted, spat into the dirt. "You'll regret this." The cowboy smiled faintly. "I've regretted worse." The man left. Dust rising in his wake like smoke after a bad fire. They didn't speak of it that night. She fed the babies. He read a passage from an old book he'd kept by the hearth for years and never opened. When she lay down, she looked at him for a long time before closing her eyes. In the dark, he whispered, "He'll be back." "I know." "Are you afraid?" "No," she said. "Because I'm not alone." Neither of them slept right away, but neither said another word. The next morning brought soft wind and stronger sun. She made coffee. He cooked eggs. The babies lay on a quilt in the patch of sunlight near the door. A wagon pulled up before noon. It wasn't him. It was the midwife, carrying bundles of cloth and a small wooden rattle. "You've got visitors," she said simply. The day passed with laughter. The innkeeper's daughter returned, this time with her cousin. A farmer's wife brought goat's milk. The doctor's apprentice asked to take a sketch of the twins, said he'd never seen a birth turn out so well. The porch stayed full all afternoon. The cowboy stayed quiet, watching her as she smiled, as she handed one baby off and adjusted a blanket with the other. She looked like someone rising, not just recovering, but returning to herself. That evening, when it was only them again, she stood watching the horizon. "I didn't think I'd make it here," she said. "You did more than make it." She turned to him. "Why didn't you ever ask me to stay?" He met her eyes. "Because it wasn't mine to ask. It was yours to decide." A long silence. Then she stepped forward, touched his chest just above the place his heart had broken all those years ago. "I'm still deciding," she said softly. "But I want to stay anyway." He nodded once. Slowly. As if receiving something sacred. They sat together on the porch as night fell. The baby sleeping. The sky streaked with the kind of color that only came after long rains and long silences. He looked at her, and for the first time, she looked back with nothing held back. Not pain. Not pride. Just presence. "I don't owe you anything," she said. "I know. But I give it anyway." The firelight flickered through the window behind them. The wind curled through the cottonwood and made the leaves tremble like laughter. And the cowboy, who had once buried love under a tree and sworn never to dig again, took her hand without a word. Some stories don't end with a kiss. Some don't end at all. They just keep growing like roots, quiet, deep, and steady. Because some families are chosen. Some are forged in blood. Others are made in the hush between storms, in the fire that never goes out, in the stillness of staying. And sometimes, the happiest ending is simply, someone staying when they could have left.